The development of an effective response, or rather response capability against cyber disruptions, whether intentionally man-made or not, requires a major cooperative effort both within and across countries. It demands a broad participation of domestic actors, private and public, as well as concerted action by states, internationally and regionally. Let me first look at the domestic level. There are three issues here, I think. First of all, raising public awareness of cybersecurity and threats, public-private cooperation, and public administration consolidation. First, the basis for effective decision-making in this field requires a targeted effort of raising our public's awareness of what they are actually doing on the internet. People need to be made aware of the risks of downloading material from dubious sites. But we should not limit our efforts merely to promoting the safe use of the internet among private individuals. Our efforts must also embrace decision makers and opinion leaders on such matters, that is to say, politicians, business leaders, and journalists, which may not always be easy because in some places politicians have no idea, even to this day, about the internet. And business leaders, unless they're involved in something that's highly internet related, may not have a clue either. And journalists, well, of course, they're the smartest people in the world, so they don't have to teach them anything. In other words, the issue of cybersecurity must be brought into the mainstream of the national security discourse. Eventually, it will be an issue in the mainstream in any case, but it is clearly in our interests that the discussion be led by us and not led by events. Secondly, at the national level, we need far greater coordination between and among the various national authorities, including law enforcement bodies, regulators, emergency response authorities, and the military. Here I would be quite frank and say that I am worried, not only about my own country, but more largely looking at the way this whole field is developing. We seem incapable of adequately apportioning national responsibility and competence. Some agencies do not wish to give up their turf or don't want others to encroach upon it. Other agencies, on the other hand, lack the capabilities to deal with issues that, thanks to modern technology, have now fallen in their laps. In other words, the division of responsibilities among government agencies that was appropriate for one set of technologies may no longer apply. Or, to put it more graphically, who should be responsible for the moats and the parapets and the portcullises of a medieval city is not an issue when you're being bombed from the air. Specifically, horizontal cooperation between economic and social institutions and law enforcement authorities is particularly crucial. And third, private sector involvement is absolutely indispensable. No effective or workable solutions can be attained absent public-private partnerships. I think it's made perhaps a little easier to convince the private sector by just looking at what happened here. It wasn't only the government sites that were shut down, it was also the banks. And in a country like ours, where 98% of bank transactions take place on the internet, then shutting down the banks has a pretty good effect on the economy. So at least the bankers in Estonia are highly aware and attuned to the issues of cybersecurity. It may be less so elsewhere, where, say, internet banking is either not that advanced or sophisticated, or B, where there just have not been attacks other than the sort of the purely criminal, let's steal the money from the banks type of cybercrime, but where banks have not been shut down. Mr. Chairman, the key to any adequate strategy, however, rests in actions at the international level. After all, cyber attacks, cyber crime, cyber terrorism are almost a priori cross-border issues. Those responsible for malicious cyber acts, by definition almost, need to hide behind jurisdictional lines. To put it another way, you'd be pretty stupid to do cybercrime in your own country because your own country presumably has the resources to find who you are and put you in jail, but if you're from across the border, there's often no problem at all. The substantive issue we need to address is international cooperation in the field of critical information infrastructure protection. We've witnessed a number of successful initiatives. The European Convention on Cybercrime and the European Convention for the Prevention of Terrorism, adopted under the auspices of the Council of Europe, are excellent examples of partial success. The European Union has passed some important regulations as well. These treaties, moreover, are not only pan-European, but open to non-European countries. The convention, the Council of Europe Convention, has been ratified by the United States. Canada, Japan, and South Africa have signed the Convention on Cybercrime, and more than 100 countries worldwide use it as a guideline for developing their own legislation. I would submit that the willingness of a country to be bound by the European Convention on Cybercrime almost serves as a litmus test for a country's preparedness to cooperate in the field of cybercrime. In this light, I should say it's extremely regrettable that Russia has chosen not to be a party to this convention. Ladies and gentlemen, there are those who claim that as it stands, the regulatory framework is underdeveloped, that adequate protection is not attainable without additional restrictions. On the other hand, there are those who maintain that no additional regulations are required, advancing the notion of an informal or self-regulating legal framework. After all, the very purpose of the internet is to dismantle obstacles to free exchange, not to encumber it. And there is perhaps a partial truth to be found in both sides, and actually this is hardly a new discussion in the philosophy of government. The limits of government and regulation have been especially since John Locke and two treatises on government, have been explored rather extensively. And so we're just looking at the same issue. Where does the right to free speech and where does the threat to public safety run into each other? I mean, that issue has now just been carried over to a new sphere of ones and zeros and binary bit codes. In enhancing the international regulatory framework, we need to exercise care and avoid rushing into solutions that will prove to be unworkable or that ignore the complexity of the network that they purport to regulate. While suggesting new forms of legal regulation, we must also always be mindful not to destroy the free exchange of ideas and freedom of speech on the internet. Because let's keep in mind, while we who believe, those of us living in democracies who are strong supporters of freedom of speech, are all quite well aware of how in some countries regulation of the internet is used to stifle free speech and how certain things are kept out of the public discourse, often with the assistance of some large Western computer companies.